Hello and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy. Today, we're talking to Brit Barron. She's a renowned speaker, teacher, storyteller, and author. Brit is a highly sought after speaker on the topics of sexuality, spirituality, race, storytelling, and personal development. Brit and her wife, Sammy, live in Los Angeles, California, with their dog named Charles Barkley.
Flawless.
Brit's new book, which we'll be talking about today, is Do You Still Talk to Grandma? When the problematic people in our lives are the ones we love. Welcome, Brit.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is a book about seeing the humanity of the people with whom we disagree.
Yes.
Which part of that work is about embracing the past parts of ourselves where maybe we didn't get everything perfectly right. This feels like the book that we need right now in this moment more than any book, more than ever. Why is that?
I think part of the reason I even wanted to write this book or wrote this book, started writing it, was I looked around and I felt the conversation start to change. There's nothing new about having people in our life that we disagree with. I think that's been true as long as there has been people. But the social landscape and the way we have conversations seem to change drastically. I think one thing to point to in that change is social media.
For
And
sure.
the way we are allowed to engage in relationships on social media, it's fine for that landscape. Someone doesn't like something, someone says something and you're like, I don't agree. You just push a button and they're gone forever. They'll never show up on your timeline again. But trying to live in that, and then I feel like we have overlaid that into our real relationships, and that's just not practical. There's people we disagree with who say things we don't like, and they're going to be there tomorrow. And so we've lost a little bit of ability of how to deal with that.
I think also social media has coded our language and kind of tribalized our language in a way that I really notice. I have family from all over the country, and sometimes I will hear phrases that are things like, oh, this African American person is so eloquent, or I don't mind people with different sexualities as long as they don't put it in my face. And those, I hear kind of things where I'm like, oh, that's what I know what that really means. And we don't say that anymore. And I think that that is something new from social media too, that we hear language as very loaded and coded in ways that I don't think were as true during my childhood.
Totally. Because now we everything means something else
Right.
because we've heard someone explain it. So
Right.
we've watched a bunch of videos that say, if you hear someone say this, then really it means they're the worst person in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
think that that's is new. And also we have a new element of the people with whom we disagree with, right?
Mm,
You can use any example. Let's say like politics. The examples that we see are the most extreme versions of that thing.
mm.
So then we default to our brain, assuming that everyone that disagrees with us, it's not by a small margin. They must be the most extreme version of that belief. And that's also not true, right? You have such a wide range of people experiencing different things, but what we see is like the most out there extreme versions. And we say like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's probably my Aunt Sally's with that group, you know?
Mm.
Can we talk about the title of the book? Because I think it's sort of the story behind it sort of lays bare what you're trying to say about we take this internet extreme response into our real lives.
Yeah. So there's a story I tell right in the beginning of the book, which is one of the reasons I sat down and started writing it. And I was at a dinner with a group of friends, and we're all sitting around the table, and one of our friends had just got back from a family trip, and she's sort of debriefing and hear all the things we did, and we're like, yay. And then she's like, but I found out my grandma voted for Trump. And after like a loud gasp, one of our friends was like, do you still talk to her? And she was like, my Nana? Like, I do. And I was like, oh my gosh, like we're canceling grandmas. I think we need to have a different kind of conversation. It was a moment where I realized, oh, this conversation of cancel culture and you're either for us or against us, or one step out of line and you're out, had infiltrated some of our most personal and intimate family relationships.
And I think that And I think that our current politics has pushed these dialogues way out of bounds, and I feel like I kind of see both sides in a way. Like, I love the way you just said, "Nana?" Like, of course you're gonna talk to Nana, but I have found myself at times getting very heated around issues that I feel extremely passionate about, and then I feel like, well, if you eat with them, you might as well just, and I see obviously people express this on social media. If you ever vote for this person, get off my page and never be part of my life. And it seems extreme, but on the other hand, I have felt that feeling myself sometimes. And why do these things feel so loaded that, like, our Nana, who, like, painted us the little giraffe chair when we were kids and helped take care of us and makes us our favorite casserole, we don't wanna talk to her anymore because of who she voted for.
Or we're being told we shouldn't talk to her anymore, right? That as
Or
if that's, like, the right way to be.
I think sometimes I've felt that. Like,
Mhm,
I can't have people in my life who support things that are so fundamentally against somehow what's fundamental to me.
mhm.
Yeah. And I think it's absolutely both and, right? Like I've spent a lot of time working in the DEI space. Like I've been in these conversations and I'm a very passionate person. I care about what I believe in and I care about what I believe about. And I'm in these conversations and in these movements. And at the same time, I wonder what happens when everyone in our world has the same lens as us. And so it's a tension that we definitely have to hold because I'm with you. Like, sometimes I'm like, I just don't want to hear it. Like, I don't like these things are so wild. Like, if you're saying them, I don't want to hear it. And, at the end of the book, I'm not saying everyone has to stay in a relationship with everyone who says the wildest thing. But if we are not, at the end of the day, able to access empathy for those people who are caught up in those ideologies or those things, then it's going to change, I think, more about us than it's going to change more about them. And that doesn't always mean that you stay in relationships. And sometimes you need space. And an election year is the best time on the planet to reassess and maybe, you know, reinforce some boundaries. And I think our ability to access empathy and be able to even see a track of understanding of what is happening outside of our group is just imperative for moving forward in the way I would like to move forward, which is as many people as possible experiencing liberation and transformation and freedom.
There was also times in the recent past where I have felt called out by people for not expressing a point of view. Here's this fence. And I see your silence. Like, you want me to, like, Facebook post about something I don't think I really fully understand, let alone am going to say, here's what everybody should think. I'm not sure what I think. And then you're being beckoned to hurry up and take a side, or else you're not as good a person as me, who, as you point out in the book, the me is maybe somebody who's started thinking about this like 5 minutes ago. And now they're like, this is the right side of the line. You're with me, or get off my Facebook page.
Yeah.
And it's hard. You feel when you say, well, I'm just gonna listen, then you feel like, no, 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 you're supposed to be dragged in. You're supposed to take a side. You're supposed to demand that people think like you think.
Yeah. I think something else the internet has given us is a sense of belonging to these sort of like nebulous groups, right? Okay. So I'm a progressive liberal woman, so that I'm a part of my group. And if my group is all posting something and if my group is all saying something, then there is this pressure. And something I say and talk about is I feel like in 2020, I think a lot more people were afraid of being perceived as racist than they were of the fact that they might actually be racist, right? Because the stakes felt higher to
Yeah.
be like, I don't really care what's going on. I just need people to not think that this is what I think.
Right. I'm good. I'm one of the good ones.
Yeah. And so we have this sort of like frenzied thing, which even I look back on some of the things in 2020 and I joke that I DM'd my chiropractor and was like, I need to know where you stand about Black Lives Matter. And he was like, man, it's kind of a lot to take in. I was like, not good enough, like, like there's just, we were in this sort of frenzied idea of, okay, we need to know everything now. And what's funny is I started writing this book and when I found out that it was going to come out October 2024, I was like, oh, by then, will this even be relevant? And I'm like, oh, wow.
Or will we all have taken a side and
Yes.
decided forever who's on which side of the fence?
Exactly. But I think our identities are far more wrapped up into these things that we believe or know or just learned or found out. And they're tied to this belonging in this sense of like, this is my group, my people, they're posting this, they're taking a stand on this. And whether or not you understand that, there's a story I wrote about. I had a friend and she had posted, there's an article just going around and around and around. And the title was like 10 steps to non-optical allyship. And I saw her share it and I was just like, oh, it's just kind of funny because I've never heard her like talk like that, you know? And so I texted her on the side and I was like, oh, what did you think about that? You know, I'm like, that's just interesting language. And and she was like, oh my gosh, to be honest, I haven't read it yet, but like everyone's posting it. Like I had to post it. And I was like, okay, like there is so much need to belong to our groups. And I think we're seeing that in so many ways that we haven't even got down to our own beliefs and ideas. And because we just want to be perceived as like true to whatever group we've aligned ourselves with.
And I think that the idea that all beliefs, and we'll talk about this in the next segment, are binary, that our beliefs are not, I have a kid on the spectrum, and we talk a lot about black and white thinking, that like things are this or that. The day is good. You can have 900 good things happen, but if you trip and fall, it was an awful day, the worst day ever. And we talk a ton about it. And I think how much we do that in our own lives, the idea that, well, we've had this long friendship, but you just said something that I know is coded for this. And now I have to rethink everything. And it is the same kind of binary thinking as I was having a great day until it rained on me.
Yes, 100%.
Let's
There,
take a break, and then we're
okay.
going to come back and really get into this issue of binary. We are talking to Brit Barron, and she is the author of Do You Still Talk to Grandma? When the Problematic People in Our Lives Are the Ones We Love.
So, Britt, we love a biological imperative on this podcast, which
Mhm,
is when something starts out being there's a reason that we do it. There's a reason
mhm.
that we do this thing and then we over apply it in our very human nature. So, binary thinking and the splitting, as you call it in the book, that psychologists call it, is something that young children should do and need to do. And then maybe we over apply it. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So, psychological splitting, it's something that is necessary in our early years, right? To understand like hot surface, bad, you know, warm, fuzzy surface, good. Like this is we just need to understand the world in terms of what is appropriate, what is safe, what is not. And that's very coded language. And if you've ever been around a kid, you know that you can't be like, well, here's a certain temperature range, and if it's in this range, or if the stove, like it's just like if it's hot surface, don't touch it. If it's this is safe, whatever. And sometimes I think we take that and exactly what you said, we could have 99 sort of good points in our day, and then one point of relationship. And to be fair, sometimes that one thing is enough for us to reassess our engagement and investment in something. However, I think it's always good to be able to hold the nuance, to hold all of the relationship, to hold all of these things, and to say, okay, now I need to put this one thing in context with all that has happened. And I think part of how binary thinking works in our minds today is that if someone can be wrong, if someone can be like completely on the wrong side of the line, then we can be completely on the right side of the line. And I think most of us have convinced ourselves that there's a way to have the right ideology, the right theology, the right politics, the right parenting style, the right kind of food, the right like carnivore diet, the like whatever it is, and we're like, we are right. Like I am fully on the right side of the line. Everything I think is gold. And if we're able to do that, then that means that someone could be completely wrong. And so being able to hold the nuance of our own life and story, I think is the only way we're able to do that for other people, to say, I really hope I'm feeling good about this where I am now, but I haven't always been there. Like,
Mm.
I think I I am so close to the realities of the times before I knew what I know now, right? Like I grew up extremely conservative evangelical. I went to like a conservative Christian college and was so indoctrinated into things that took me so long to undo. And when I believed those things, I also thought I was right then. And so it's helpful for me to remember this feeling and to be like a little suspicious of my own self-righteousness to say, well, yeah, no, I was wrong then, but now I'm completely right. Right. Like maybe I'm on a journey. And if that's true, then what does that mean for how I engage with others?
And I think the dialogue around some of that identity has been, of late, pushed very strongly into good and bad, righteous and unrighteous, racist and non-racist, um, allyship and non-allyship. And I do think also we can live very siloed lives. Amy and I both live in the Northeast of the United States, which tends to be a politically liberal area. My husband is from a very small town in Texas, which does not tend to be that way. And I find that just spending time outside of my quote unquote bubble, it makes it harder to hold my point of view that maybe all people who believe X are naturally bad. And I remember we were at a 4th of July parade sitting on this street in this small town and getting into we were kids, and my kids were playing with the kids of the people next door, and next door, like next to us in the parade, just chatting and having an amazing time and laughing about all sorts of different stuff. And then comes down the street the parade, and in the parade are various floats representing different points of view. And I quickly noticed that we were not celebrating the same floats as they floated by. And I thought, it's interesting that if we talked about this, we would be enemies so fast. And here we have just spent 45 minutes waiting for the parade to start. But I think some people would push back and say that to kind of give grace to people who have ideas that you have come to find personally odious, or attacking the identities of people you hold dear, perhaps, is somehow giving quarter to evil, I guess, in some way. What do we talk about with people who say, to sit and visit and give your grace to people who believe things that damage people you love is wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've heard a lot of narrative around like that makes you complicit then.
Right.
That
Complicit.
you're
Right.
sort of
Or like
acting
I
like
Complicit if you talk to Nana.
Yes,
Mhm.
or I can agree with anything except for things that deny my basic identity. Like those are kind of things that you hear and I'm like, wait a minute, that sounds kind of reasonable to me, you know?
Yeah. Yes, and it is, and at the end of the day, we get to decide
Right.
where, when, and how we want to engage, right? Like as a person, as like a queer person of color, as a woman, like I'm not just like going on the road and being like, that guy with a Confederate flag. I bet you know what I mean? Like that might,
Let's hug it out.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
like let me just go see what he has to say. I think more so I want to acknowledge that most of us don't exist in a reality where the people we love and already have deep relationship with are on the same side of the line, right? It's not that we just need to go marching around and find like the most extreme version of the opposite whatever and like strike up a conversation. But most of us don't have the luxury of saying, oh, I will have zero relationship with anyone who thinks this, or I'm going to be complicit, because we're talking about, again, internet people, if you want to like unfollow them because you don't agree, like go for it.
Yeah.
But when we've got grandparents, parents, partners, cousins, sisters, coworkers, like these people who are just going to be in our area, like regardless, I think we have to acknowledge that that is a reality for most of us. And sometimes I feel like it is a little arrogant to be like, oh, exist in a space where no one in your life holds any XYZ. It's also unrealistic. And so I don't think that something I think that gets falsely tied together is that being able to have empathy for someone and find that is the same as co-signing on their beliefs. Like
Yes.
is like if I can have empathy for you, then that means that I can't now also think that what you think is wrong or these things. You can do both. I think we understand that feelings aren't facts and facts don't necessarily equate feelings. And so when I talk about these conservative evangelical churches, right, no one on the world like gets more under my skin than some of the narratives coming out of these churches. And when I think about people sitting in those chairs, it's easy for me to sometimes be like, oh my gosh, let me think about all the ways like I am better than you. um, and then I think, well, are they just like antiquated? Like, is it a cult in their body? Like, or are they me 15 years ago? And me 15 years ago, I understand the safety that it felt to feel like, oh, we've got the right ideas. We've got the right God. Oh, thank God we found this church with like the right way to read the Bible. And I remember how safe it felt to sit in those seats. And so I can have empathy in realizing that it doesn't mean I think it's right or good for the world or where people need to be sitting, but I can absolutely find empathy for that. And I think when we don't allow ourselves to do that, we say things like, you'll be complicit anyway. I think, where are we going to go? We're going to go to like progressive happy land, but we're going to eventually be by ourselves, right? If every corner we look and you don't agree, like we will be standing on the top of a mountain, on the highest point, on the highest hill by ourselves.
When you have people in your life who say things that you think, okay, this is just not true, but you have the empathy of like, okay, but that's what they're being served in our siloed algorithms. But then you also have to consider the siloed algorithm you live in, right? If that's true for them, then it's also true for you. And you made a really good point in this book about some of us replace the church of our upbringing with, I can just quote Glennon Doyle and whatever she says, because Glennon Doyle has all the answers. Which I think Glennon Doyle herself would be like, please don't, please don't make me the person who's in charge of what you should think about everything.
Yeah.
But we do kind of smugly like, well, I read Brene Brown now, so I am right about everything.
I have
Unlike when I
definitely
went to church.
attended dinner that it was the Church of Rachel Maddow. Did you hear what Rachel said?
Yeah.
Rachel thinks this.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been
And if
there.
it's true for them, then you have to consider that same nuance you have to apply to yourself and your past self and the times when you maybe didn't get everything right.
Yeah. I mean, we, as people, I think specifically in our like Western American society, we love an external authority. It's just easier if someone tells me what to do. And especially like all my friends that are former church kids, I'm like, you guys, like Brene Brown just can't be our new pastor. Like we need to disrupt the model that we are looking for the person that tells us exactly what to do. Again, Glennon, Brene, Rachel Maddow, love. But can we appropriately place how we get information from people and go back to a place? Again, I'm not saying there are some problematic people in our lives where it's like, no, it's too far and I am going to have a boundary. And I think that's totally fine. And there are people in my life I don't talk to. And I think there's such a big gray space of in between. And sometimes I feel like, even in podcasts or interviews or friends when I'm writing this book, it's almost, I found myself almost becoming that external authority and people asking me like, they want
How is this all going to work out, Britt? We need to know. How many times a week should we talk to grandma? We need to know.
It's a specific equation would be incredible. Like, I feel like someone wants like a flow chart. Like, okay, if your grandma is this nice, but then she's this homophobic, like, you can actually still talk to her, but not in June because it's Pride Month.
It can be 70-30, exactly. Never during Pride Month.
I was forming the question. I didn't ask it, but I was forming that question. Like, well, so Britt, how do you know when somebody is so toxic they have to be cut out of your life? Right.
Yes.
What are the 10 signs?
But the answer to that I would say is only you know that.
Yeah.
And being able to trust our own internal barometer and sort of shut down some of these outside voices that are telling us that we're doing all these things and to be like, okay, I have so many friends because I grew up in church and so many friends that are out and queer now have just, wild relationships with their parents. But at the same time, so many of them are like, it would be more painful for me to be cut off, like to go no contact with my like primary family source, then I'd rather just sit and talk about surface level things with them once a month. And I'm like, great. And if that is what you want, then you get to have that and go for it.
And that's not a binary either. Your family of origin is going to hurt you a lot, no matter how wide that gap is. Nobody has a relationship with their family that people don't say things that hurt their feelings and make them feel bad because of terrible assumptions those people make based on your historical relationship. So I don't think any family unit is that binary thing where you're going to exist in a way where they never say like, "Oh, that's Margaret. She forgot because she's so scatterbrained." It's like, wait, I've changed. I'm not scatterbrained anymore.
Yeah.
Middle-aged now and I do things normally, like that's not a binary either.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think the goal is not, okay, you just let everyone say anything around you, and
Right.
but the goal is that you are so confident in sort of your identity and able to have empathy for yourself in the ways that you show up nuanced, that you can apply that onto other people. And those relationships may shift and change. The topics may shift and change. The reasons may shift and change. But being able to access and to hold that, I think is just going to take us a lot farther than drawing these lines in the sand and then redrawing them and then redrawing them until they get so tight that, what I mean, there's three people standing in them just waiting for like one of us to say the wrong thing.
And there is, I mean, I think that taking on the burden of this work is difficult, but there is something to interacting with people and saying, a small example is that some of the people in my life believe that New York City, where I live adjacent to, is a war zone in which 9,000 people are running around with AK-47 shooting each other 24 hours a day. And just to be like, nope, I was there yesterday with my kids. We were walking around, having a great time, went to the park. Like, it's actually fine. There's information going back and forth. And I feel to the degree that I can be open to it, that understanding that living in a small town and having 1,000 regulations about how you run a store that is 2,000 miles away from the federal government feels very onerous sometimes. That, like, if we can actually access each other's humanity, there is some learning that can go back and forth.
Yeah. And I always encourage people to go back to like, how did you learn what you know?
Right.
Like, did someone tweet something and it blew your mind so much that you were like, wow, let me restructure sort of some of the foundational ideas I had, right? There are people who sat in a relationship with me as I sort of was able to move on these things. And I think you're right too. Like, I live in LA and it's you know, we're so good at just like being here, and we
Right.
are just like sometimes kind of the worst. Like, we're just like,
Yeah.
I mean, every house I think on my street has an electric car. And
Yeah.
and that just is like it feels so normal, and there's been things about living in LA that can make you just so elitist.
Right.
Um,
It starts with the $23 smoothies, and then
it
you're
does.
just going from
Named after
there.
celebrities. Like, it's not just a $20 smoothie, it's a Haley Bieber smoothie.
There you go.
And it's unfortunately delicious. And
Here's the really bad news.
it's the worst news
amazing.
is everything else in that stupid store is also pretty delicious. But my wife and I were driving, we took a road trip, and so we're driving through Texas, which was like 90% of the road trip for somehow. I feel like
'Cause
we got to
Texas is
Texas
huge.
in an
Yep.
hour, and then like 20 hours later, we're still driving through Texas.
That's how it
But
works.
driving through there, I was like, oh, like, okay, like I need to be reminded that LA is its own very specific thing. And if I don't regularly get myself out of there and out of places, like, it does something to my brain to think like, everyone knows this, everyone believes this, we all do this, like $20 for a smoothie. We're like, everyone needs to be electric, everyone has to have, so like, you just get into these things, and just even physically being in a different space that helped me realize, oh, I think I would believe a different narrative about the world if I was here.
Mm.
And that's super helpful to remind yourself.
We're talking to Brit Barron. Her new book is Do You Still Talk to Grandma? We'll be right back. Brit, can we talk about cognitive closure? Another idea introduced to me by this book that
Yeah.
is a psychological explanation for what we've been talking about. It is the point at which our brains decide that we have enough information to make a decision. Again, if you're ever going to leave Starbucks, important to have cognitive closure. Like, I think I will have the pumpkin spice today. But then just with the binary thinking, it gets over applied. Can you explain that to everybody?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a psychologist named Ari Kuglansky who coined this term. And exactly right. Cognitive closure is the point at which our brains have decided we have enough information to make a decision. And then we become cognitively closed. So simple example, we're standing to cross the street, we look left, right, left again. Like at some point, we got to do it. Um, and our life is a series of decisions. So this can be a helpful phenomenon. However, in times of stress and uncertainty, our need for cognitive closure actually heightens. And so we are more apt to convince ourselves that we have all the information we need to make a decision in times of stress and uncertainty, which I think is just important to know because right now we are in a ton of stress and uncertainty
Yeah.
as a people group, I'll just say, humanity at large. And so something that is really important that I line out in the work, kind of something you said, Margaret, made me think about it. I've heard things like we can disagree and still be friends, but we can't disagree about racism. That is like something I've seen out a lot. Which I always think disagree on racism about what, right? How we address it, what's the best way forward, how do we do these things? Is the government's role? Is it activist role? Do the activists have to be in line with the government? Does the government owe us? Like there's a million things we could disagree about racism. And so something I think is a helpful tool is I always try to say, what are my primary beliefs? And that I'm cognitively closed because I am. All human beings are deserving of dignity and freedom and rights. And that's just a primary belief. That's my what. I want to continually be cognitively open on the how,
Yeah.
right? So how this happens, what is the best way, what makes sense for our world. And sometimes, especially in the progressive world, I feel like we argue so much over the how, instead of being able to just agree on the what. And I was teaching at a high school once doing a session for Black History Month, and two of the students were arguing, like, who was more impactful, Martin Luther King or Malcolm X?
Mm.
And I'm like, in that question of who was more impactful, Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, I think the answer is yes, right? You have two people who absolutely had the same what. Like, we want liberation for Black people to make a different how. And so I think when we look at, okay, we can agree to disagree, but not on this, I'm like, no, there's a million ways we can disagree and agree on all of these things. And we have to remain cognitively open around the how. It's okay to be cognitively closed on the what. And if we disagree on the what, okay, you don't think people are deserving of dignity, then community is at stake and could be lost in that place. On the how, I'm into it. I'm down to clown. I want to talk because there's a lot I can learn and have learned and can share. And those are less likely to rub against each other, if that makes sense.
I have never heard that construct before, and it is so I'm getting literal goosebumps. Like, it's so right, and it's interesting because I find that with sometimes, people from different areas, I've heard a criticism of like, "Oh, you all love ideas, but we actually live this stuff," like living in a southern area closer to the border and having to deal with schools that are impacted by migration in a very specific way. Or having served in the military, and like if you go to my wedding, I have an extremely diverse racial and economic group of people who are my best men, but I say things that you consider racist. But if I go to your wedding, I'm gonna go and there's gonna be only white people there. So, like, who's racist? I'm not sure, and I think that then what happens is you kind of get sucked down into debates about who's really racist and, well, I this and I would never say that, and but you live like this. And I think that construct is, can we agree that we both have other people's dignity as a value, and like we disagree on how to respect it? Seems to me, I've never heard it expressed that way, and it gets to something that I've seen play out in a way that I find puts me in the tumble dryer, and I'm like, whoa, I don't know where I am in this.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're absolutely right. And I think that is the funny thing about, and the good thing about life is everyone is actually living it out more than we think.
Right.
But when we convince ourselves that we have found the right way to live it out, um, then now we can't sort of have some of those experiences of being like, and I think that's a perfect example. Like, I have friends who were in the military as well. And like, grandpa was in the military. My dad grew up, and he grew up with such a diverse group of friends. And like, I think he would even be appalled at like the way they would interact and find common ground with each other. Now he would be like, that's actually super racist. But he's like, but that's actually how we built these like cross-cultural friendships, and there's just so much work. And I think honestly, everyone is more radical until they start working it out in real time.
Yes,
I
that's
think
right.
living in LA, and we have quite a few people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yes.
And I think everyone in other parts of the country has these very radical ideas about what you should do. And I think everyone is far less radical when you're figuring out how to work it out in real time in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
This cognitive closure thing, what it helped me understand was that was why people don't get it, right? Like the people on the other side of this imaginary line that I've what would it take for for the scales to fall from your eyes and see the reality? You just can't seem to see the reality. This helped me understand that that's right. It's a thing. It's called cognitive closure. We all do it. And um so you don't have to convince the people on the other side of the line that they're wrong or that you're right before you can sit together at the Thanksgiving table. But that's probably not a reasonable goal. You show up with who you are and what you believe, but how can I get them to change their mind? There might not be a way because this is a thing that we do psychologically.
Yeah. And I think, the key to any relationship is um, expectation, right? Like unmet expectations or like unsaid, unspoken expectations, those are called resentments. And so if you sit down at Thanksgiving and you're walking in the door thinking, I finally have this silver bullet of information that is going to
Right.
change
Right.
radically everything my family believes.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, you're already like setting yourself up. And so I think how we approach certain things and the ways in which we can understand those and the way we allow ourselves to hold those information. And I always say, I'm like, if I'm not in a space where I feel like I can even access my empathy, I'm not going to engage because I'm about to set both of us on the wrong on the wrong train. Right.
And it strikes me, we sometimes talk about with algorithms and stuff, talking to our kids and saying like, helping our kids see like this algorithm is trying to trick you to stay on longer, but you're smarter than the algorithm. Like this, advertising is trying to trick you, 13-year-old daughter of mine into thinking you need to spend $10,000 every week at Sephora to be a happy person. Like, but trying to like show them kind of the webbing underneath it and what's pulling it. And it seems to me like there's room for us to do that for ourselves here. Like
Mm.
this social media world and this political world right now is trying to trick you into thinking that you hate Nana. And you don't hate Nana. You have
Right.
different ideas about stuff, but you can still access some empathy with each other. Just don't have this conversation on Facebook where it's like, if you ever say this, then delete me forever. Like it can't happen in social spaces, but we're kind of all being tricked into thinking that we hate each other more than we do.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what you were saying the other day of like, if you have a good day, but you trip and fall, like, we are convincing ourselves too that seeing this one thing somehow erases every memory and experience we've had with these people in our lives. Again, I'm talking about the people in our lives who we love, who like our
Right.
nan, who we've
Yeah.
been
Right.
like,
Like you said,
Right.
you don't have to go
That are
to the
worth it.
Confederate
I'm
flag's
like,
house,
yeah, I'm
Mhm.
like, what? But these people who we've got these memories, we got these experiences, you're exactly right. Like we are being tricked into thinking that, and there's like a pride sense too of like, what are the people like my radical like activist friends going to think about me if I go to my Nana's house for Thanksgiving, right? And so we're like balancing all of these like social pressures, when probably what we want
Nana,
is
I
to see this.
cannot accept that stuffing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can't do it.
I'll never be allowed to be on Twitter
Yeah,
again
I
if
can
I
be
take
here.
that
Just don't post a
stuffing.
picture of me.
Exactly.
But it's also not like for me that the eye-opening thing was like, okay, and there might be a part in which I go to Nana's and I eat stuffing and we watch different channels and Nana might say some stuff with which I disagree and I don't have to be silent about it, but nor do I have to convince her she's wrong today before I leave the table or else I can't go, right? That doesn't have to, that's not why you're doing this. So you can slowly, stealthily make them realize to think they need to think the right way, i.e., the way you do. That's not the point of continuing to engage with people you love with whom you disagree.
Yeah, I
Maybe
think
you get there, maybe you don't.
the benefit of having people in our life who we don't agree on everything with is helpful for. I think sometimes we think it's only helpful for them. It's also very helpful for us.
Right. That's what I was trying to say.
You know,
That's what I was trying to say. Exactly. It isn't so they will slowly become enlightened like me. That's not what
yeah,
this is
yeah.
about.
I know
But
what
the
this
world
person
would be
needs.
so much better if everyone was so enlightened like me. I mean,
That's
that's
true.
the real problem.
I think that until I change my mind about something, and I'm like, well, glad the world didn't become just
You're
like
like,
me
note
before I
to
was.
self, everyone.
Yeah.
I'm coming back.
We're on a journey.
We've updated some things in the operating system.
Yes.
Please install Brit 3.7.
Right,
Yes,
We
yes,
updated
yeah.
some things in the operating
Connect to
system.
Wi-Fi when you go to sleep tonight
There
because
you
we've
go.
got some changes.
We've got some updates.
Yes.
We've been talking to Brit Barron. Her new book, it's out now. It's called Do You Still Talk to Grandma When the Problematic People in Our Lives Are the Ones We Love? This book has given both of us so much to think about and talk about. We loved it. Brit, tell our listeners where they can find you and everything you do.
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at Brit Barron, 1T, 2 R's, at BritBarron.com. And you can find Do You Still Talk to Grandma anywhere books are sold.
And you can also find Brit buying a $23 Haley Bieber smoothie
Yep,
a couple
find
days
me
a
at
week.
Air
Go to Air
One.
One.
Yeah.
She'll be there. Brit, thanks so much for talking to us. We'll post links to the book and everywhere our audience can find you.